Good morning, interweb. Let's conlang. Now that we've discussed the various tenses, aspects, and moods found in natural languages, let's talk about how we can go about including these in a conlang.
Did somebody say tense, aspect, and mood?
Yes, I've brought Biblaridion on board to lend some help. Today, we're going to create a tense, aspect, mood system for my conlang, OA.
Let's do it. First of all, we need to decide what information will be grammaticalized in OA. No natural language could ever grammaticalize all possible tenses, aspects, and moods. Instead, most of these meanings will be expressed using periphrasis, additional wording, or simply left up to context. So our first step is to choose which of these meanings will be mandatory to mark on the verb.
I think it's best if we keep things pretty simple here. With OA, I'm prioritizing minimalism and straightforwardness, so I'm aiming for a low degree of complexity.
Alright then, in that case, for tenses, let's go with a simple distinction between past and non-past. This means the future won't be explicitly marked on the verb, instead being encoded by other means, but we'll get into that later. As for aspects, we'll start with a basic perfective versus imperfective system. And to keep it simple, we'll say there are no grammatical moods, and that all modality beyond plain old realis is encoded by way of periphrasis. Happy so far?
Absolutely, nice and simple, I like it.
Next up, we have to decide how each piece of information is marked. Often in natural languages, the present tense is viewed as the default tense and is therefore left unmarked, while the other tenses are formed through affixation or some other form of marking. Let's do the same here, leaving the non-past tense unmarked and creating a suffix for the past tense.
Cool, and I'm assuming we'll handle the aspects in a similar fashion.
Yes, one will be marked and the other not. Now, in some languages, the imperfective is unmarked and the perfective receives marking, but in others, the opposite is the case.
My vote would be for the latter, unmarked perfective, marked imperfective.
Works for me. Most often, tense or aspect marking will come in the form of an affix derived from a lexical source, but another option is reduplication. Reduplication involves the repetition of all or part of a word to reflect a change in grammatical meaning. The meaning encoded by reduplication varies from language to language. In OA, we could say that, while the unmarked verb is interpreted as perfective, implying a single or complete occurrence of the verb, reduplicating the first syllable frames the verb as iterative or ongoing, which therefore becomes a sort of imperfective. Our two tenses and two aspects combine to create four possible encodings. Now, this works as a basic framework, but always think about how exactly your tense-aspect combinations might be interpreted. Many languages don't distinguish between the perfective and imperfective in the present tense, since most of the time, if the verb is happening right now, defining it as either instantaneous or ongoing isn't really relevant.
Sure, like how in German, ich lese eine Zeitung can mean both I read a newspaper and I am reading a newspaper.
Exactly. So in OA, while the non-past perfective is used as a basic present tense, the non-past imperfective could be used to imply that the verb happens not just in this present moment, but as a general truth, giving us a habitual aspect.
Oh cool, so if we conjugate a verb like me to be sick, o me would mean I am sick right now, while o me would mean I am often sick or I am sick in general.
Exactly, and we can apply the same distinction to the past tense as well.
O meek, I was sick. O me meek, I was sick in general, or maybe I used to be sick. Pretty sweet.
However, notice what we've done here. The past imperfective now also serves as a past habitual. For a stative verb like me, this works just fine, since there's very little difference between I was often sick and I used to be sick. But for a dynamic verb like ngoza, to run, this distinction is much more important. Perhaps for dynamic verbs, the past imperfective retains its core meaning of an ongoing event in the past, and a new suffix, ram, evolves to distinguish the habitual aspect, which combines with the past tense marker to form ramuk.
Cool, so o ngoza, I am running right now. O ngongoza, I run often. O ngozak, I ran. O ngongozak, I was running. And o ngoza ramuk, I used to run. Looks great so far, but what about the future?
If the future tense isn't grammaticalized, it can instead be expressed through periphrasis, or, more specifically, through an auxiliary verb construction. One verb used as a future auxiliary in many languages is to go, as in the English, I am going to do it. We can do the same thing for oa, using ta'i, to go, in front of a verb to convey the future tense.
So something like o ta'i ngoza, literally I go run, would mean I will run, right?
Yes, but, once again, we have to consider how this auxiliary interacts with the other tenses and aspects. A quick thing to point out. In English, notice how if we conjugate I have gone in the past tense, it becomes I had gone, not I have went. That is, the tense and aspect marking goes on the auxiliary verb, while the lexical verb is unmarked or placed into a less marked form. Auxiliary verbs tend to work this way in most languages, though it's certainly not the only possibility. But here, we'll keep it simple and say that the auxiliary takes all marking and the lexical verb is left bare.
So the plan then, I assume, will be to conjugate the auxiliary verb, run it through the various encodings and see what aspects pop out.
Indeed. Like if ta'i is rendered in the imperfective, that would give us a future imperfective, emphasizing that the action will be in the process of taking place at some point in the future.
O ta'i ngoza, I will be running. Great, but what about the past tense? How can we have a past tense form of a future auxiliary?
Yes, this may seem a bit paradoxical, but remember that the future is the moodiest of the tenses. Very often the future gets used for modal information, especially when it's combined with the past in some way. Two of English's future tense strategies, the words will and shall, used to have past tense forms, which today survive as would and should, which now serve to convey conditional and subjunctive modality respectively. A similar thing could happen here in oa, so rendering to go in the past perfective may be used as a conditional, marking things that would occur if some condition is met.
Okay, so o ta'i ngoza would mean something like I would have run if the weather was good.
Precisely. Meanwhile, if the ta'i auxiliary is used in the past imperfective, it may have a slightly different implication. Using the past imperfective of ta'i would literally mean I was going to do something, which signals that, from the standpoint of a past time frame, an action was going to take place in the future, but may not have actually happened, creating what's called an irresultative aspect.
Cool, so o ta'i ngoza would mean something like I was going to run, but it started raining.
Yeah, something like that. We can express other forms of modality through additional auxiliary verbs. To know often gets used to express ablative modality, but we can have a separate verb that means to be allowed, conveying permissive modality. And to need could be used to encode obligative modality.
O tas ngoza, I can run. O ngai ngoza, I may run. And o ahui ngoza, I must/have to run.
Note that all the auxiliaries we're using for modality are stative verbs, and therefore none of them will be compatible with the past habitual form, only the past imperfective form.
So o tas ramok ngoza, I used to be able to run. O ngai ramok ngoza, I used to be allowed to run. And o ahui ramok ngoza, I used to have to run, are all ungrammatical because the ramok suffix never occurs on stative verbs.
Right. Always keep the lexical source of your grammar in mind, as it often affects how your tenses are formed and interpreted. We can even use modal auxiliaries for negation. While the most common way of negating a verb is with a particle, like not in English, or an affix like the ne prefix in Czech, some languages, like Grebo here, use what's called a negative verb, where the negative particle actually acts like an auxiliary verb, taking all the tense and aspect marking while the lexical verb remains unmarked. So we could create an auxiliary verb, mrat, that negates a following verb that receives all tense and aspect marking.
So o mratmi would be I am not sick. O mratokmi would be I was not sick. And o ta'i mratmi would be I will not be sick.
Yep, and we can even pull the same trick for interrogatives. Something like tinta could be oa's interrogative auxiliary.
O tinta ngoza, do I run? O tintak ngoza, did I run? O ta'i tinta ngoza, will I run?
Right, and with that, we've got a pretty solid system of tense, aspect, and mood for oa. If we wanted to, we could keep on coining auxiliaries and new constructions ad nauseum, but what we've got covers all the bases well enough.
Agreed. Thanks for your help, man. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad I could be of assistance. I'd love to stay for a little longer, but unfortunately, o ahui ngoza. Rao.
Rao. Good morning, interweb. You need to get yourself over to Bibliaridion's channel right now. Links in all the usual places. Biblaridion is a wonderful conlanger, a top chap, a joy to work with, and this video would not have been the same without him. So go over there, blast Bibliaridion's page. He thoroughly deserves it. So a massive thanks to him and a massive thanks to you for watching. Also, massive thanks goes out to each and every one of the fine folks on Patreon who helped make Artifexian a possibility. In particular, Isaac Silbert, P Chehayl, Robin Hilton, World Anvil, Ripta Pasay, John Hooyer, and A.E. Stephenson. You all are amazing. Until next time, Edgar out.